Well, to be fair, that kitty was being a little mean to the other animals, so it did deserve a little reprimanding apparently. We open this week with more of those girls from the end of the last episode who are just one off from being nice. They were known as the Problem Solver 68, and no, not those abominations against God. No, they were, as the name suggested, girls who took on odd jobs, though as we could kind of tell by the fact that they were working from above a 7-Eleven, they had less than a stellar track record. Speaking of which, our main girls were discussing their own issues. Now, they did start off by doing the right thing by trying to backtrack the illegal tank shells that were used by the helmet jobbers of the previous episodes, as it seemed unlikely that lower tier grunts like them would be able to easily attain such ammunition on their own. However, they did start to discuss their main objective of getting out of death, with each girl bringing up their own suggestions. Starting with Seika, who suggested that they sell some shady beads, complete with a flyer that even have a freaking pyramid on it, and not even the good Egyptian pyramid like what their school was named after, which I just learned that Abydos was an ancient city in Egypt. This also clarified my little mistake from last week that Chiriko didn't have cat ears, but rather wolf, or more specifically in this case, jackal ears. Then again, I have seen certain waifus who claim to be all sorts of different furries at once. Anyway, Seika's suggestion was of course rejected, so they moved on to Hoshino, who did bring up the good point that they should try to get more students to enroll in their school, which they could do by hijacking a few buses. Well, if you do go down that route, I do know of a guy who could provide you with some know-how, just as long as you keep track of who's who, so that the intro doesn't become incredibly confusing. On that note, when Hoshino's proposal was also of course rejected, Shiriko suggested that they just straight up rob a bank. Now, to her credit, she did do her research and even made everyone some handy ski masks, but yeah, come on, these girls would never do something like that, to the point they would become one of the most iconic images of this franchise that not even told noobs could ignore. But yeah, with that, the only one left was Nonomi, who did have a perfectly legal and not at all shady suggestion, which one might think is her providing her own donations to the school, but instead... Okay, let's go rob that bank. Meanwhile, we got a more proper introduction to the 68ers. There was their leader, Aru, who tried to act like a girl boss, and like most, failed miserably at it. Kayako, the kind of gothy yet straight man to her team. Haruka, their resident yandere, and their actual leader, Mutsuki, who's probably going to kill them all at some point. Not that they wouldn't self-destruct on their own, as after failing their latest mission, they were left all but broke and were forced to share the cheapest item on the Shiba ramen menu. Fortunately, Seika was on shift, and she, along with her club, did feel bad for their fellow victims of perpetual poverty. Thus, they gave them a little extra out of kindness and to prevent Haruka from going postal. The average Reddit moderator. Anyway, the task force managed to recognize that they were from the Gehenna Academy, which I'm actually familiar with as basically being the Jerusalem equivalent of hell, thank you Steins Gate. It would explain Aru's devil horns and red hair, though not so much her naivete and inability to do her job properly, as she hadn't even realized that they had just met their next targets. You know, I'm starting to think that this lady isn't quite the criminal mastermind she makes herself out to be. Though seriously, I really like the interactions between the 68ers. They have a good chemistry and work off each other well, especially whenever Aru ends up screwing things up and her friends have to clean up her messes, while she tries to maintain a strong front, likely not to worry them, even though she really should be a little more honest, as her team does have a tendency to kind of gaslight her. With that, the 68ers launched their attack the next day after hiring a bunch of faceless extras to help in their little raid. Yeah, why can't you be like these girls who plan out stuff like hijackings, robberies, and idol activities? Yeah, one of those is just a little bit worse than the others. This led to a pretty good battle with the 68ers, pulling off some clever tactics, with them seemingly relying a lot on traps and ambushes. It wasn't quite as good as previous episodes, as there wasn't nearly as much movement, especially from these faceless extras, who even clearly had some easy shots. And ultimately, the Foreclosure Task Force pulled through with a very basic blitzkrieg strategy, led by Hoshino, who I'd say was the MVP of this battle. Still, it wasn't bad, as it did at least lead to a pretty badass Mexican standoff between Shiroko and Aru. And the battle ended, hilariously enough, because the 68ers could only hire their goons until the end of the school day.
でも給料が出ないんじゃね。あとは自分たちで何とかしなよ。
And this is why you don't let your employees unionize. With that, the episode ended with everyone calling it quits, but after the credits, we also learned who was hiring all of these jobbers, which turned out to be a Terminator CEO and the Anti-Spiral? This was a fun little interaction to a kind of sort of rival team for our main cast. The 68ers, in spite of being one off from the best name ever, were still very entertaining, especially Aru and her try-hard tendencies to cover up her clumsiness, and at the same time, the Foreclosure Task Force were equally hilarious with their get-rich-quick schemes. It was a little lighter on story and world building, the latter of which I have been told we're unfortunately not going to get that much more later on, but at least the character interactions are still great. Unlike the jobbers of the first two episodes, the Problem Solver 68 were actually quite engaging antagonists. Obviously, it helps that we can actually see their faces, unlike these easier to animate copy and paste enemies, but like the Foreclosure Task Force, I like how each of them had their own unique personalities. And while I'm not entirely sure if it was intentional, they also do seem to act as foils to each of our main girls. Both teams had trolly lolis as their de facto leaders, and a cynical straight man to their team's nonsense. Seika and Haruka were kind of opposites, being a tsundere and yandere respectively, while Aru kind of acted as a foil to both Shiroko and Nonomi, being probably the most combatively skilled of her team, but also an airhead with little in the way of actual foresight. It made their interactions with their rivals all the more engaging, while also highlighting the best aspects of both sides. The interactions in the ramen restaurant especially were pretty damn wholesome, especially Aru realizing that they would be enemies the next day. She became easily my favorite member of her team as a character who tries to act tough, but deep down is just a total sweetheart, which was probably part of why they failed so many missions. It's endearing, and in turn makes you want to cheer for these girls just as much as the Foreclosure Task Force. On that note, the task force meeting was one of the funniest bits of the show so far, with no one being able to provide a good money-making suggestion, with each one being worse than the last. The fact that our heroines were suggesting bus jackings and robberies was hilarious enough, but the fact that they had already taken the first steps to their schemes made it even better. And yes, I am aware that some of this stuff will be revisited later, so I'm looking forward to that. I will say though, I am a little disappointed that stuff like the furries and robots in this world will apparently remain mostly unexplained, but with those interesting looking antagonists at the end, there seems to be a lot more to look forward to at least. And overall, this was a good introduction to one of the other main schools of the show. The 68ers might screw up a lot, but at least for the most part, they didn't mess up this episode, though the battle could have been better. For the Boom Boonja episodes I missed during my little vacation, we're just going to do a triple episode review for Wednesday. Yes, it's taking a little while to play catch up with these shows and my sleep schedule, but things should be back to normal by next week or so. So, look forward to it. Until then though, farewell for now my friends, and I should probably switch these out with some goggles to better cover my face.